Okay, well, just wanted to welcome you all to this online workshop for people who stutter called Successful Presentations. And I have worked with the National Stuttering Association to offer this to you. And we are very excited about this. My name is Mara Ormond, and I am a leadership coach. So I work with people on workplace issues to help them get rid of the things that are blocking them from reaching their full potential in their workplace. And I also happen to stutter. I have as long as I can remember. So we are going to start. Here are some objectives for the workshop. To deepen your understanding about and intentions for your approach to presentations. And by that I mean how you approach it now, deepen your understanding of how you approach it now, and also set some intentions for how you would like to approach it. And also to assist you in developing customized, tangible strategies to improve your experience presenting information to others at work. And the third is to remind you that you are not alone. So that is the slogan of the National Stuttering Association, and everything that we do attempts to help you feel that you're not alone. That's why the NSA has local chapters and annual conventions and does things like this to make sure that we all understand that stuttering can feel like a really isolating experience, but you are not alone. None of us is alone. So those are the objectives. And examples of presentations. I think at least for me, when I think of a presentation, I sometimes think of something very lofty, like someone addressing the UN General Assembly or a Microsoft board meeting or something like that, something really huge. But really, presentations are things that most of us have to do on an occasional basis at work, such as status reports at staff meetings, leading or facilitating meetings, facilitating groups, presenting PowerPoint decks, demonstrating new products, new services, sales pitches, job interviews, speeches, remarks, and toasts. All of these things include everyone else who's there having all eyes on you. Everyone else there, all their eyes are on you. That's kind of the unifying feature of what I mean when I'm talking about presentations. So before we jump into my ideas, by the way, this workshop will include some different components. I'm going to present some of my ideas. I'm going to ask you to share some of your ideas on the participant chat a few times. And I'm also going to ask you to do what I call jot downs. And that's when I'm going to ask you a question. And I'm going to ask you to write down the answer on your own. So I want you right now, before we get started, to get a piece of paper handy. Make sure you have a writing utensil handy, because there will be many times throughout this presentation where I ask you to jot down an answer to something that I ask you. And that jot down, all of the jot downs together, are going to become a personalized workbook just for you. So, so that is how that is going to work. So now we're going to have our first sharing. Before I jump into any of my own ideas or anything like that, I'd like to ask you to share in the chat When we talked about presentations, any of these things that I mentioned as being within the definition of a presentation, I'd like you to share in the chat right now. What emotions do you experience before, during, or after anytime you have to present information to other people? Just share some ideas in the chat.
No, it's not this person.
I'm hearing some background noise here. May I make sure that everybody has their microphones muted? That's on the lower left-hand corner of the screen. You should be seeing a little microphone. Could please make sure that you're muted.
Am I muted?
I'm still hearing some talking. So if you could just check out on the lower left-hand side of your screen, there should be a little microphone. Make sure there's a red X through it. And in the meantime, I'm looking at everybody's sharing in the chat: terror, anxiety, fear, embarrassment, lack of confidence. Yeah, this is, I can relate to all of these. And now let me move on to ask you to share some thoughts that you find yourself thinking before, during, or after a work presentation. So share some thoughts that you find yourself thinking. What will other people think about me? I hope I don't stutter too much. Trying to visualize a positive outcome. Great.
Okay.
Thinking about all the words that you might get stuck on.
I lowered it.
Okay, and now I'm going to ask you a third question, a third share, for what experiences you feel in your body before, during, or after a work presentation. So what do you experience in your body? Tension? Tightness? Tension? Rapid heartbeat, increased heart rate, dry throat, sweaty hands? I can relate to all of these. I bet a lot of us can relate to a lot of these. Okay. Well, I want to thank you all for sharing those, and that is some really hard stuff, as we know. I can relate to all of them. And so now we're going to talk about what we can do about those, how we can make this experience of presenting information at work, how we can make that experience a little more positive, a little more pleasant, a little more empowered. And so I'm going to introduce you now, an overview. Those of you who have done previous workshops with me in this series, you will recognize the format here. But this is what I call my "you got this" formula for successful presentations. And the first step is to get clear about yourself. The second step is to do top-notch preparation. The third step is the Showtime strategies. And the fourth step is one that a lot of us don't do, a lot of us forget about, but to debrief, an evidence-based debrief after the event. So we're going to talk about each of these steps in more detail, and but first we're going to pause. So I'm going to ask you to pause. I'm going to ask all of you to take a deep breath in and exhale fully, no matter how long it takes. I have two reasons why I'm asking you to do this. One is that we've just talked about some things, and I want to take a pause before we sort of have, before we share some ideas. I want to have some time to kind of integrate what we just talked about, what we just shared, what just happened, to integrate that a little bit before we just immediately dive into the next topic. And also, I want you to experience firsthand the power of a simple deep breath and what that can do for your nervous system. So just taking one simple, short, deep breath can really do a lot to changing what's happening with your nervous system. It can relieve anxiety, relieve stress. So, okay, so now let's dive in and let's get talking about get clear about yourself. And we're going to spend a lot of time on this step because just like the last step, it's kind of one that maybe we don't give enough attention to normally. So, and the reason that it's really important to get clear about ourselves before we give a work presentation is that we are all different. We're all different people. We have different jobs. We stutter in different ways. There's so many variables that no piece of advice, no model, no idea is going to work for everyone. It's going to be right for everyone. So that's why it's really important to tailor our approach to ourselves and what we know about ourselves. And in order to do that, we have to make sure that we know that about ourselves. We get clear about some things about ourselves. So what I'd like to ask you is, what exactly is the worst part of a presentation? Just saying how I know I do, and I bet I'm not the only one. Just say, I hate having to present. It's so scary. I don't like it. I don't want to do it. Those are kind of not specific enough. I think we want to get a lot more specific so we have something that we can actually work with, something that we can address. So some possible factors are the fear and the dread that you feel beforehand, wondering whether we're going to be able to get it out fluently, wondering whether we're going to be able to say what we need to say, how we feel during. And again, it's going back to a lot of the experiences that you all shared, all of these really hard, stressful, anxiety, all of these hard experiences, how we feel afterwards, the replaying, the self-flagellation about what we did or didn't do or what we should have done better, blah, blah, blah. And these are the ones that came to my mind. Very easily, I might add. It didn't take me long to spit these out, but yours might be different. So I'd like you to just take a moment now, and here's another jot down to get clear about what exactly is the worst part for you. What's the worst part for you? Just write down some brief notes. Okay, and now what we're going to talk about next is our innate approach to being in the spotlight. And what I mean by this is, if I didn't stutter, what would my onstage persona be like? Like, is it really professional? Would it be funny? Would it be irreverent? Would it be very serious? Would I be averse to it no matter what? Even if I didn't stutter, I know that I wouldn't like this. And some clues, some ways that we can sort of look for this information is to think back to ourselves as children and how we behaved as children when we were playing with our friends, when we were with our families, whatever, to think about what our attitude was toward being in the spotlight. Like, for example, I remember when I was little, when my cousins would come to visit, we would put on plays for our parents. And my cousin would be like this very sort of cold queen. And I'd be this sort of zany, madcap, incompetent maid who was kind of very slapstick and always kind of making mistakes and very goofy. And so that gives me sort of a clue about the fact that I kind of liked that. Kind of liked being silly like that. I have a friend named Kathy, who when she was little, she told me how anytime a box came into her house, she would take the box and bring it into her bedroom and organize all the boxes by size and have them all kind of cataloged and organized. And whenever her mom needed a box, she'd come to Kathy and Kathy would be like, okay, here are my boxes. And so it was all very orderly and very calm, and she was very in control of everything. And so that gives us a little clue about what her persona might be. And so I'd like yeah, so that's one way that we can look for that information. Or when you're among your people, the people you feel most comfortable with, how are you then? And how are you when you're alone, when you're home alone? Are you sitting reading a book? Are you dancing around the house, singing into a hairbrush? I know those two things are not mutually exclusive. I've been known to do both of those things. But still, I think you know what I mean in terms of we're looking for clues about what your sort of innate style is. And then we're going to ask ourselves, how does stuttering react with that? If we're someone who's very sort of quiet and calm and serious, you know, our stuttering may like exacerbate that tendency, make us even more likely to feel fear or to not want to do public speaking. If we like to be a ham, if we like to be silly and have the spotlight on us, our fears about stuttering may kind of mitigate that. And so we want to bring more of that out. So what I'd like to ask you to do now is to ask yourself, this is another jot down now, how would I describe my innate stage persona? And then how does my stuttering affect that? So just take a moment and see if you can remember anything from your childhood or just some information about how you are when you're alone. That'll give you some insight about your innate on-stage persona. This is important because we want to incorporate as much of our true selves into, well, every aspect of our lives, but for our purposes here, into the way that we present information. We want to do that in a way that reflects who we really are and that uses our strengths. Okay. And now next I'd like to talk about something else, what I call unconscious expectations. And what I mean by that is, what are our images of how it should go when we do work presentations? What are our comparisons to other, or who are we comparing ourselves to? And what thoughts, emotions, and body experiences do we expect ourselves to have? And I'll just go through those one by one. Our images of how it should go. These are unconscious, by the way. These are things that we're not aware of. We have these expectations and we're not even aware of them. So when we imagine how it should go, I bet a lot of us, I bet what we would really say if we really thought about it is that we think it should go perfectly. We think that we should be perfect, and anything less than perfect is going to mean that we didn't do a good job, or that we didn't meet our expectations. And even saying that out loud exposes how ridiculous that really is. But I think a lot of us, I know I do, nonetheless hold myself to that standard. And then comparisons with other people, whether it's someone famous, you know, a famous orator, or someone we know, someone we work with, a friend of ours for whom public speaking is a real strength. And if we don't do it like they do, then we're not going to have met our expectations, or we're going to consider ourselves to have failed in some way. And then lastly, thoughts, emotions, and body experiences. I think a lot of us forget that even people who are really good at public speaking get really nervous. And so I know sometimes when I'm about to give public remarks, I judge myself for feeling nervous. I say, oh my gosh, like, why is my heart beating? Why am I so nervous? You know, I shouldn't be like this. You know, it means that I'm not competent, or it means that I shouldn't be doing this, or it means that I'm not good enough, that kind of thing. To expect ourselves to feel just completely loose and relaxed, you know, maybe isn't such a realistic expectation, because everybody, regardless of whether they stutter, regardless of whether they like presentations, everybody feels nervous. People even that I've been very surprised about, famous people, have shared that they still get really nervous. So so I'd like now to do this as another jot down that I'd like you to answer. What are your unexamined expectations for yourself when you present information to others? Just jot down a few notes. And this goes for everything I ask you. If you all would like to share some of your answers in the chat as well, you are more than welcome to do that. That way you can see other people's ideas and insights. Okay, so we've just talked about unexamined expectations, unconscious expectations we have. So what kind of expectations do we want to have when we are about to give a presentation? And here's a slide that I have done in purple because I want it to be very, I want it to stand out, okay? This is very important. We can only succeed or fail at things over which we have control. We can only succeed or fail at things over which we have control. So then how do we define success? So a way that I define success might be something like, I get out all the information I wanted to share. I share all the information I needed to share. And I didn't leave anything out because I was afraid of stuttering. Or something like, I was well prepared and I said everything I needed to say. Or I practiced my speech techniques successfully throughout the whole talk. Or even something like some outcome related to the content of the material. It's like Bob changed his mind about, you know, how we direct the project kind of thing. Maybe it doesn't even have anything to do with stuttering, but these are some ways that we can define success rather than whether we stuttered or not. And so one thing that's a little hard to do at first, but the more we practice it, it can get easier. Can we have a definition of success that is big enough to include the thought that my presentation is going to include a number of speech blocks, visible speech blocks, or my presentation is going to include some odd pauses. Or my presentation, or I'm gonna say a couple weird things. I know this is the case for me. I'm gonna say a couple weird things because my mental gymnastics are gonna be going crazy because of how stressed I am. That I'm gonna end up, my thoughts are gonna get muddled and I'm gonna say something weird. So can we include that in a definition of success when we're talking about our work presentations? So right now, here's another jot down I'd like you to think about. What does a successful presentation look like for you? Generally speaking here usually, unless you have something in particular in mind, generally speaking, what does a successful presentation look like for you? And remember, it has to be something over which you have control. That's the kicker. I'm still hearing a little bit of background noise. I don't know if everybody has made sure that your mics are muted. Okay, so these are all the things included in the first step of my formula. So these are all things where you can get clear about yourself so that you can decide what is right for you in terms of defining your own success for a work presentation. So now we're going to move on to step 2. But before we do that, we are going to pause again. So take in a deep breath. Let out. A deep exhale, no matter how long it takes. And now let's move on to top-notch preparation. And we're going to talk about preparation in 3 ways: context and content, practice, and the whole self. And we'll go through those right now. So we're going to talk mostly about context here. And the first thing, and it's amazing how often we do not do this, but get 100% clear about what the point is of your talk. Get 100% sure that you and your boss or whomever's involved are on the same page about what you're supposed to be talking about and what the outcome is supposed to be. Confirm where it's going to take place. Confirm who's going to be there. This is very important for something else that we're going to talk about later. Confirm the delivery method, and by that I mean, are you supposed to rise up from your seat and walk to the front of the room? Are you going to have slides with a clicker that you're going to have to be using, or are you going to stay in your seat? Are you going to be reading from your tablet? Do you want it on paper? Do you want it on a cue prompter? Just thinking through exactly how you're going to, from where and how you're going to deliver the presentation. And then on to what's more of content. Get it done early. I'm not always great at that. I tend to be a last minute kind of girl. But the more that we get it done early, the more that we have time to practice, which is going to be the next thing we talk about. So get it done early. Add a personal touch. And again, we're going to want to make this specific to us and what feels right and what feels natural for us. But to add a little bit of humor, to smile, to make eye contact with the audience, use hand gestures. And the reason I'm including this in preparation, because doesn't this sound like something that would be important, like while we're actually delivering the talk? While I'm including this in preparation, excuse me for a moment, I'm just going to shift around, is because sometimes we have to plan for that. Sometimes we forget to do that when we get really stressed and anxious. We can forget to do that. So we can even write notes to ourselves. Make sure to make eye contact, move your arms. I know, like, a lot of us tend to just stand very stiffly when we're presenting, and we have to kind of remind ourselves to move and be a little bit more relaxed physically. And then decide whether and how you're going to disclose your stuttering. Okay, this is a really big deal. And again, it's going to depend on your own preferences. I am a big fan of disclosure. I find that it takes the pressure off me. It's mostly for me that I disclose, not for them, so that I can feel comfortable and I don't have to be afraid of my first speech block, which I know is going to come. And I tend to always go for humor, and I tend to like to disclose at the beginning of when I'm talking. Some people like to disclose like the first time they have a speech block. They can just pause and say, oh, and by the way, I stutter. That's what was happening just there, but we're all good. I like to do it ahead of time. And I will share a few of my sort of openings with you. I really like the humorous route, as I mentioned. So I have a few that I rotate between. One of them is not mine originally. I got it. I just want to let everyone know. I got it from Woody Starkweather and Janet Ackerman, who I took a course with a long time ago, but this is really a good one. You say, I have good news and bad news. The good news is that I'm the last person that you're going to have to speak with before we get to eat lunch. And the bad news is I stutter, so I have no idea how long it's going to take me. One of mine that I made up is, well, I was asked to speak for 10 minutes and I stutter, so I prepared 5 minutes worth of notes. And another one that's not really as good, but I'll share it anyway. I say, sometimes I just want you to know that I do stutter, and it comes and goes. There are good speech days and bad speech days for me. And as long as my bad speech days and my bad hair days don't happen on the same day, I'm usually happy. So these are just a few examples of ways to break the ice about stuttering. And again, it's a totally personal thing. That's what works for me. And something else might work for you. But then the last thing is to decide whether or not to use a stuttering management strategy. And that sounds very official. What I mean by that is, are you going to really try hard to minimize your speech blocks? And again, this is not something that's going to work for everybody. Someone who is very committed to non-avoidance, maybe this wouldn't be the right thing for them. But again, it all depends on what feels right for each one of us. So some people I know, somebody I know said that when he is speaking publicly, he finds that if he talks really loudly, he tends to stutter less. He tends to have less speech blocks. And so that's something that works for him. He tends to kind of talk a little bit louder than he normally would. And he finds that that helps. Other strategies like that might be a particular rhythm to your speech, a particular breathing pattern. And if you have anything for either one of these, the disclosure or the management strategies, you can feel free to share that in the chat. And now it's time for another jot down. I'd like you to just jot down some notes on when and how do you want to disclose that you stutter, and how do you want to manage your stuttering during the presentation. Okay, oops. Okay, so now moving on, still within preparation, we're going to talk about practice and the importance of practice. So I really recommend that whatever you're doing, whether it's a speech in front of the UN General Assembly, or whether it's a 5-minute update about your project at the weekly staff meeting, nothing is too small to warrant practice and rehearsal. So I really recommend that you rehearse it at least 2 times. I really recommend that you rehearse it for someone else. It's amazing how it changes everything, just having someone else in the room. And to go and to spend some time in the venue, walk around the room, see if you can, figure out where you're going to be standing or where you're going to be sitting so you can actually be there. And to spend some time visualizing. Just picture the room, picture all the people in the room. Do like a guided relaxation with yourself and just shut your eyes, imagine everyone in the room, where they're sitting, how it all goes. Picture yourself afterwards. That's really important, to picture yourself afterwards, feeling satisfied about how it went. And then next, the whole self. And by that, I mean, let's get our nervous systems ready, okay? So we want to exercise, okay? Whatever your form of exercise is, do it that day, that morning, or maybe the night before, just to get your nervous system to a good baseline, to do some kind of relaxation, whatever works for you, breathing techniques or guided relaxations. Definitely your eating is really important. To eat light proteins, to eat power foods and avoid heavy foods. We don't want something feeling like a ton of bricks in our stomachs when we're up there trying to hold ourselves together. So, okay, so that's it for preparation. So now we're going to move on, but I bet you know what we're going to do before we move on. We're going to pause, and I'd like to ask you to take another deep breath. Exhale fully, no matter how long it takes. And now we're going to talk about Showtime strategies. Okay, so Showtime strategies, we talked at the beginning about, or rather you shared at the beginning, what your experience is like, what emotions, what thoughts you have, what experiences you have physically with regard to presentations. And it was some pretty hard stuff. It was some stressful stuff. So let's talk about how we want to feel. So what are our desired emotions? Do we want to feel courage, calm, enthusiasm, or connection with our audience? What thoughts do we want to have? I belong up here. This is interesting. I'm really enjoying talking about this subject. Desired body experiences, energetic, loose, smooth breathing. So take a moment and here's another jot down. Write down some emotions, thoughts, and body experiences that you want to have during the presentation, while the presentation is taking place. Okay, and then we're going to talk about some strategies for evoking those very thoughts, emotions, and physical experiences that we want. One of them, and if you've been with me on the first 2 workshops, these will be familiar to you. Have some kind of a rally cry or a battle cry that you can silently say to yourself as you're on stage. Like somebody introduces you or someone says, okay, Mara, you're up. And then all of a sudden, all the eyes in the room land on you, you're on. Silently saying some kind of rally cry. And it can be something like something from a famous battle speech that inspires you, or something from your favorite sports team, or something from your favorite movie, or something involving some of your favorite profanity. Remember, this is all inside your head. It's whatever's going to add some levity or some comfort to you. So whatever works for you, no one else is going to hear it. An affirmation or a reminder, I belong here, I can do this, I have valuable experience, and write it on the paper, write it on your notes. Take deep breaths like we're practicing today. Think about your posture. Just one very quick, simple tip about that. Right now, right at this moment, I bet most of us are holding our shoulders at least an inch higher than we really need to. So let's take a moment and just consciously lower your shoulders. So that is something else that you can have in mind that, that can help relieve the tension. And the physical tension and the mental tension feed on each other. And it's a loop that builds on each other. So if we can sort of circumvent that by lowering the shoulders and relaxing that, it can help the mental stress and the physical stress. And then having an item in your pocket or some jewelry or something like that that is infused with the message that you want. You can do this. You got this. I got this. You know, I was born for this. You know, just infusing something that's in your pocket that you can rub with your fingers, or a piece of jewelry that you can look at. These are very good strategies for helping us stay calm and stay brave and focused while we're in the middle of that. So here's another jot down. I'd like to ask you to jot down what would work for you to evoke the emotions, thoughts, and physical experiences that you want during the presentation. So just take a moment and write down some notes about that. And obviously this goes with all of the jot downs, that you might not think of everything right here on the spot. So you can revisit your notes later, revisit these questions later, and you might come up with more insights. So that is it for Showtime strategies. Now we're going to move on to the evidence-based debrief. But first, of course, we're going to pause. So take a moment. Take a deep breath in. Let out a relaxing exhale, no matter how long it takes. And now we're going to talk about the evidence-based debrief. So I think that when most of us, at least for me, and I'm pretty sure I'm not alone in this, that when we finish with something like this, we have so much adrenaline pent up, and we're so relieved to finally have it over with, that we can just be very sort of vague and emotional about it. Like, oh, thank God that's over. Or, you know, that sucked. Or, you know, that was terrible. Or something that's very emotional. And the other thing is that it's vague. It doesn't really give us any tangible information that we can work with, that we can learn from, that we can use to do it better next time. So what I call the evidence-based debrief is when we're going to do exactly that. We're going to debrief in such a way that we're actually looking at evidence instead of just our pent-up emotions. So the first thing that we're going to do after a presentation is to revisit the definition of success that we defined for ourselves. So what were my terms for success? I wanted to say everything that I wanted to say, or share everything that I needed to share, okay? And name at least one instance, or as many as you can, but at least one, where I successfully achieved that, okay? And you don't move on until you find at least one thing that you did right based on your own definition of success. Okay, and then next is, what was the experience like? We're going back to those three modes now, the emotion and the body and the thoughts. What emotions was I experiencing during the presentation? What did my body feel like? And what thoughts did I have during or after the presentation? And we're actually going to write those down. Not now, but I'm talking about like when you're actually using this debrief after a presentation. And are your thoughts true? And by that I mean, I have another purple font slide because it's so important. We think that our thoughts are true, but they are not. We think that every thought that we find in our head is the truth, but it's not. Our thoughts are the product of our conditioned mind based on our beliefs about ourselves and about the world. So our thoughts do not represent the actual truth. They're filtered by our conditioned mind. And so the way that we can figure out, are they true? Or how true are they? It might not be an either or thing. How true are they? What's the factual evidence? So let's take an example. Let's say that I just finished a work presentation and I'm filled with the thought, oh my God, everyone thinks I am totally incompetent. And what's the factual evidence? Well, the factual evidence is that I presented X and Y and Z information. I had a few or a lot visible speech blocks. That's the evidence. What are at least two alternative conclusions that someone else might draw from the evidence? Okay, so let's pretend that there's no like right answer here. Somebody else might conclude, oh, I presented all that information and I had a speech block, you know, or I had many speech blocks. I wonder if they thought that I was really brave for standing up there, because everyone's afraid of public speaking. And I stutter and I'm up here. So someone might even be impressed by us. Or something that is the case more often than we might like to think is that they're not thinking much about us at all. Most people don't think about us half as much as we think they do. So all that worry about what they're thinking, they might have been like, okay, done, move on to the next subject, the next topic. And would everyone in the world agree that this thought is true? So no, I mean, there's got to be at least one person in the world, although I'm sure there are more than that, who aren't going to say, no, I'm totally incompetent because I had some speech blocks during that talk. Or would I be able to prove this thought in a court of law? These ideas, if you are interested in these ideas, they're incredibly powerful. They take a lot of practice, but they're very powerful and they're very accessible. Here's some ways that you can learn more about this. There's a book called Learned Optimism by Martin Seligman, and there's a website called thework.com by Byron Katie. They're not the only ones, but they have, in my opinion, they have some of the best and most powerful opportunities to learn more about this, about challenging our negative thinking. So, and then next in the evidence-based debrief are the lessons learned. What's at least one thing I want to do the same next time? And what's one thing, but no more than 3, because we're focusing on the positive here, not the negative. What do I want to do differently next time? So this kind of assessment forces us to get really specific about the facts, not just vague emotions. And it gives us more accurate information that we can work with and we can learn from. So that is the end of number 4, evidence-based debrief. And so in conclusion, I just want to leave you with these thoughts that we, as people who stutter, have been silenced long enough by our fears and our incorrect beliefs about ourselves and about the world. And it's not our fault, but it is our responsibility to heal ourselves so that we can say what is ours to say, which, by the way, the world needs. Every single one of us, it needs to hear what we have to say. And so by following my "you got this" formula, you can begin to shift how you think about work presentations, and you can find an approach to presentations that works great for you. And so one final jot down, what I'd like you to do is to just write down at least one thing that struck you as being relevant or helpful today. And what is at least one idea that you want to begin trying right away? So as you're writing those down, I just want to say that this workshop is being recorded, and it's going to be shared with everyone who registered. It's also going to be available on the job seekers, or I think it's called Stuttering in the Workplace. Have you changed it? Yes, Stuttering in the Workplace tab or page on the westutter.org website, which is the NSA's website, westutter.org. There's a Who We Help tab, and then if you go down, it says Stuttering in the Workplace, and you'll find this and the other workshops as well. And also, we're going to be sending the slides around. So, and we will also be sending a transcript of the chat so that you can remember and have documentation about what exactly you shared with each other. So I'm going to stop this share for a moment. And I am going to, what I'd like to do, first of all, is just to thank all of you, like I said, for being here, because each and every one of you was a part of this and added to this experience just by being here. And I'd like all of us to go into gallery view again and just take a look at each other, just give each other a wave. And now, after having like harped so much about being muted, what I'd like you to do is to actually unmute yourself. So go find your that little microphone and unmute yourselves, and let's just take a moment and all just say goodbye to each other.
Hi, everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Bye,
Thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, everybody.
Thanks, Mara.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you all. It was really a pleasure. Take good care.